I handed over a $2,000 rent check to live in my childhood bedroom while my siblings lived there for free. My mother promised a discount, but instead slammed a laminated maid roster on the counter demanding I clean up after my sister and her deadbeat husband. When I finally snapped and exposed that I secretly bought the foreclosed house out from under them, the family froze in pure shock. My name is Maya, and I am 33 years old. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever stood up to toxic family members who used you for money. Now let me take you back to the morning everything changed. The ink on my rent check was barely dry when my mother snatched it from my fingers. We stood in the sprawling kitchen of the house my grandmother left her. I had moved back to save capital for my independent accounting firm. I expected a simple thank you. Instead, my mother reached into her designer handbag and slapped a heavy laminated piece of paper onto the marble island. It landed with a sharp smack next to my coffee mug. I looked down at the paper. Across the top in bold red letters it read, "Family Contribution Schedule." My name was listed next to every degrading chore in the house. Monday was deep cleaning the upstairs bathrooms. Tuesday was doing laundry for the household, including my 35-year-old unemployed brother Marcus. Wednesday was scrubbing the baseboards and picking up the yard waste left by the expensive new designer doodle puppy my sister Shayla had just bought. I stared at my mother in disbelief. "I am paying you $2,000 a month, Brenda. That is $100 over market rate for a basement room. Now you want me to be an unpaid maid?" My mother adjusted her robe and glared at me. Her voice dripped with the familiar condescension she reserved just for me. "You should be grateful I am letting you stay under my roof, Maya. Family helps family. Your brother is going through a tough transition right now, and Shayla is very busy building her social media brand. They need a supportive environment. You just crunch numbers all day at a desk. The least you can do is contribute some sweat equity to this household." Sweat equity. The phrase made my blood boil. I was a certified public accountant working 60-hour weeks handling complex forensic audits. Meanwhile, Marcus spent his days losing money on fake crypto investments, and Shayla spent hers taking selfies by the pool. Before I could even formulate a response, heavy footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor. Tyler, my sister Shayla's husband, strolled into the kitchen. He was a tall white man with a permanent smirk who had lived in this house rent-free for 2 years. He was wearing silk pajamas he bought with my sister's credit card. Tyler opened the pantry, grabbed a box of expensive organic cereal that I had bought for myself, and started pouring it into a massive bowl. He did not even look at me as he spoke around a mouthful of my food. "It is really good you are finally contributing, Maya. Shayla and I are building a massive startup right now. We need the creative space to focus on our vision, and we cannot be bogged down by domestic distractions. Plus, the younger generation is just so lazy these days. It builds character for you to get your hands dirty." I gripped the edge of the marble counter so hard my knuckles turned white. Tyler had never held a real job in his life. He spent his days lecturing people online about the entrepreneurial mindset while sleeping under his mother-in-law's roof. And here he was eating my groceries and telling me to scrub his toilet. "Let me get this straight," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and level. "I am paying the equivalent of a luxury apartment lease to sleep in a damp room downstairs. You want me to wash the clothes you sweat in while you sleep until noon, and you want me to clean up dog feces in the backyard so you can focus on your imaginary business." Tyler chuckled condescendingly and took another bite of my cereal. "Do not be so bitter, Maya. You have always been the angry single career woman. Just do your part for the family." My mother nodded in agreement, crossing her arms. "Tyler is right, Maya. Stop being so selfish. You will do the chores on the list, or you can pack all your bags and find somewhere else to live by the end of the week." I stared right back at my mother and pushed the laminated schedule across the marble island. "I will not be doing that, Brenda. I am a paying tenant, not your indentured servant. If you want a maid, you can use some of my $2,000 to hire one. Otherwise, I am keeping to my own space." The words had barely left my mouth when Marcus stumbled down the wooden staircase. He was 35 but moved with the lazy entitlement of a spoiled teenager. He wore designer sweatpants and a heavy gold chain that he claimed he bought with his latest crypto gains. In reality, I knew his bank account was permanently overdrawn. He was staring at his phone, completely ignoring the heavy tension in the room. "Make way for the king," Marcus announced loudly, holding up his phone screen. "Dogecoin is up 2%, baby. We are going to the moon." He walked straight toward the coffee pot where I was standing. Instead of asking me to move, he shoved his shoulder hard into mine. The impact knocked me off balance. I stumbled backward, and the hot coffee I was holding sloshed over the rim of my mug. The dark liquid splashed directly onto my crisp, white silk blouse and my tailored navy blazer. The scorching heat seeped through the fabric, instantly burning my skin. I gasped and jumped back, swatting at my ruined clothes. Marcus did not even flinch. He just laughed and poured himself a huge cup of coffee. "Watch where you are standing, Maya," he sneered. "You are always taking up too much space in this house." "Are you kidding me, Marcus?" I yelled, grabbing a dish towel to dab at the massive brown stains spreading across my chest. "I have a major client meeting in 45 minutes. You bumped into me on purpose." "Do not act like a victim." Marcus snapped back, his tone instantly turning vicious. "You have always been a jealous little brat. You cannot stand that I am making big moves while you are stuck at a boring desk job. You are just mad because Mom actually loves me, and you are just the human ATM." The sheer audacity of his words left me temporarily speechless. I looked at my mother, expecting her to finally step in and parent her precious son. Instead, Brenda rushed over to Marcus, checking his expensive sweatpants for any stray coffee drops. "Are you okay, baby?" she cooed, smoothing his designer shirt. Then she whipped her head around and glared at me with absolute disgust. "Look what you did, Maya! You almost ruined his clothes with your clumsy behavior. You are so full of negative energy today. It is honestly exhausting." "My clumsiness," I repeated, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "He walked right into me, Brenda. My professional work clothes are completely ruined. It is just a cheap suit," Brenda dismissed, waving her manicured hand in the air. "Marcus has high-stakes investments to manage today. He cannot be stressed out by your constant whining. Now grab a mop and clean up this mess before it stains my beautiful hardwood floors. And do not think you are getting out of your chores just because you are throwing a childish tantrum." Tyler snickered from the kitchen table, pouring himself another massive bowl of my expensive organic cereal. "Yeah, Maya, clean it up. Chop, chop." I closed my eyes and took a very deep breath. The old Maya would have screamed. The old Maya would have cried and begged for a little bit of fairness. But the new Maya, the professional forensic accountant who dealt with liars and frauds for a living, recognized a losing battle when she saw one. I did not say another single word. I walked over to the pantry, grabbed the floor cleaner and a thick roll of paper towels. I dropped down to my knees on the hardwood floor and began wiping up the spilled coffee. My mother turned her back to me, pulling Marcus into a warm hug and asking him what he wanted her to cook for breakfast. As I scrubbed the sticky floor near the kitchen island, my eyes drifted down to my mother's heavy designer handbag resting on the lower shelf. The gold clasp was completely undone. Sticking out of the side pocket was a thick manila envelope. Across the top in bold, aggressive red letters was the word "urgent," followed by "final notice of default." My heart skipped a beat. My mother always bragged to everyone about owning this house free and clear. I shifted my body, blocking the bag. With lightning speed, I opened the camera app and snapped a crystal clear photo of the bank account number before standing back up. I grabbed my ruined blazer and walked out the front door without looking back. The drive to my downtown office was a blur of angry thoughts, but by the time I sat at my desk, my mind was completely clear. I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on finding money that people are trying to hide. I booted up my dual monitors and pulled out my phone. The photo I had taken of the red envelope was perfectly crisp. I typed the routing and account numbers from the final notice of default into my secure investigative database. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling property records, county deeds, and public loan registries. What I found in the next hour made my blood run cold. My grandmother had worked as a hospital nurse for 40 years. She paid off the mortgage on that colonial house a decade before she passed away. She left the deed to my mother free and clear. It was supposed to be our generational wealth, a safety net for the family. But according to the county registry, my mother had secretly taken out a massive home equity line of credit 5 years ago. She had drained every last drop of the equity my grandmother had built. And worse, she had stopped making payments. The account was in severe default. The notice in her purse was not just a warning, it was a pre-foreclosure notice. She had not paid the bank a single dime in 8 months. The bank was preparing to auction off my grandmother's house to the highest bidder. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the glaring red numbers on my screen. My mother had lied to me. When I moved back in, she claimed the $2,000 a month was needed to help with property taxes and a small renovation loan. She swore my rent was keeping the house afloat. So if she was not paying the mortgage, where was my hard-earned money going? I dug deeper. I pulled up the public financial filings and matched them with the traces from my own cleared rent checks. The truth was worse than the foreclosure. My mother was using my $2,000 monthly rent check to fund my siblings' pathetic lifestyles. Every time my check cleared, the funds were immediately split. Half of my money went straight to paying the minimum balances on Marcus and his maxed-out high-interest credit cards. My hard-working money was funding his fake crypto investor lifestyle and his expensive streetwear. The other half was funneled into a joint account my mother shared with Shayla. I pulled the recent transaction history for that account and felt sick to my stomach. 2 weeks ago, Shayla and Tyler had gone on a luxury vacation to Tulum, Mexico. They had bragged all over Instagram about staying at a 5-star eco-resort and drinking expensive tequila. They claimed that their imaginary startup was doing so well, they needed a corporate retreat. I looked at the exact dates and amounts. My rent money paid for their beachfront cabana. My rent money paid for Tyler's overpriced cocktails. I was single-handedly financing their delusions while they treated me like garbage. The betrayal stung deep in my chest. My mother was willing to lose the only valuable asset our family had just to spoil her 2 favorite children. She was letting the bank steal my grandmother's legacy while demanding I scrub their toilets. A heavy silence settled over my office. I did not cry. Crying was for victims, and I refused to be a victim. Instead, a cold, calculating calm washed over me. They thought I was just a boring number cruncher. They thought I was a pushover who would just pay the bills and take their abuse. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I printed out every single document, every county record, and every transaction history. I organized them into a thick, secure folder and locked it in my desk drawer. I knew if I confronted my mother now, she would just lie and manipulate the situation. Marcus would throw a tantrum and Tyler would gaslight me. I needed a better strategy. I needed an airtight plan to take back control. The bank auction was scheduled for the end of the month. I had exactly 3 weeks to make my move. I picked up my office phone and dialed a real estate attorney. He answered on the second ring. I told him I needed to establish a limited liability company and that I was preparing to buy a distressed residential debt. I hung up the phone and smiled. The forensic financial audit was officially over. The hostile takeover of my house had just begun. I pulled into the driveway that evening feeling a strange sense of peace. The anger that had consumed me all morning was gone, replaced by the thrilling precision of a well-executed strategy. I unlocked the front door and immediately noticed the strange echo in the hallway. I walked up the wooden stairs to the second floor, heading toward my bedroom to change out of my stained work clothes. I turned the brass knob and pushed the door open. My breath caught in my throat. The room was completely empty. My heavy oak dresser, my queen-sized bed, and my entire wardrobe were gone. In their place stood a massive glaring ring light and a cheap faux marble desk. Standing in the center of the room was my sister Shayla, holding a tripod and posing for her phone camera. Over in the corner, Tyler was loudly unboxing a massive curved gaming monitor and tangling a mess of black cords across the floor. "What is going on here?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Shayla barely looked up from her screen, adjusting her lip gloss in the camera reflection. "Oh, hey, Maya," she said casually. "We decided to repurpose this space. My lifestyle brand is really taking off, and I desperately needed a dedicated content creation studio for my brand deals. Tyler needs a place to stream his gaming channel too. It is all part of our digital empire expansion." I looked around the empty room. "And my belongings?" I asked. Tyler laughed, plugging a cable into the wall. "Your stuff is downstairs, Maya. Mom said you would not mind taking the basement. It is totally fine for you since you just sleep and go to work anyway. You do not really need natural light to be an accountant." I turned on my heel and marched down the hallway. I descended the creaky wooden stairs into the unfinished basement. The air down there was damp and smelled faintly of mildew. Sitting on the cold concrete floor were my clothes carelessly stuffed into black, heavy-duty garbage bags. My expensive work monitors and my comfortable mattress were just shoved against the brick wall, gathering dust. Before I could process the sheer disrespect, my mother walked down the basement stairs carrying a laundry basket. She looked around the bleak space and sighed dramatically. "Now, Maya, do not start pouting," Brenda said, waving her hand dismissively. "Your sister has a real opportunity to make something of herself with her social media. You have to understand that families make sacrifices for each other. You have a stable job, so you do not need a fancy room. Just set up your bed over there by the water heater. It is perfectly cozy." The old me would have collapsed onto that concrete floor and sobbed. I would have screamed about the unfairness of paying $2,000 a month to live like a rat in a cellar, while the people living off my dime claimed the master suites. But the new me, the CEO of the company that was about to buy this house from the bank, felt nothing but cold, hard amusement. A slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. I looked at my mother and nodded. "You are absolutely right, Brenda," I said smoothly. "Family makes sacrifices. I am happy to take the basement so Shayla can pursue her digital empire." My mother blinked clearly, taken aback by my sudden compliance. She had braced herself for a screaming match, and my calm acceptance threw her completely off balance. "Well," she stammered. "Good. I am glad you are finally being mature about something. There is just one small thing," I added, reaching into my leather work tote. I pulled out a crisp sheet of paper and a black pen. "Since I am moving my home office into this basement, my accounting firm requires updated documentation for my housing stipend and tax compliance. I need you to sign this standard tenancy and rent receipt acknowledging my $2,000 monthly payments. It is just corporate red tape, so human resources can verify my residency." I held out the clipboard. Brenda scoffed, rolling her eyes at my request. "You and your corporate rules," she muttered. She snatched the pen from my hand. She did not bother to read the header. She did not notice the specific legal terminology, establishing me as a month-to-month tenant with protected legal rights under state housing laws. She just scribbled her signature at the bottom of the page and handed it back to me. "There," Brenda snapped. "Now get your bags unpacked, and do not forget you are on dish duty tonight." She marched back up the stairs, leaving me alone in the damp basement. I looked down at the paper in my hand. Her signature was perfectly legible right next to the printed date and the $2,000 amount. I carefully folded the receipt and placed it inside my locked briefcase. Step 1 was complete. I now had undeniable legal standing in this house as a paying tenant. The very next Saturday, I woke up to the sound of a live band tuning their instruments right above my head. I walked upstairs and looked out the kitchen window. The backyard had been completely transformed. White canvas tents were set up across the manicured lawn. A massive professional barbecue smoker was slowly roasting expensive cuts of brisket and ribs. Two servers wearing crisp white aprons were carrying trays of champagne flutes out to the patio. It was an extravagant catered party, and standing right in the center of it all was Tyler. He was wearing a custom-tailored linen suit, holding a craft beer, and laughing loudly with my Uncle David. I walked out onto the patio just as my mother hurried past, carrying a stack of cloth napkins. "What is all this?" I asked, crossing my arms. Brenda barely slowed down. "It is Tyler's 32nd birthday party," she said proudly. "We are celebrating him and his amazing startup journey. Shayla invited all the potential investors and our extended family. You should make yourself useful and go tell the caterer we need more ice at the Raw Oyster Bar." A Raw Oyster Bar. I walked over to the main catering station and glanced at the invoice clipped to the head chef's metal clipboard. The total cost of the party was exactly $2,000. The catering company name was the exact same vendor listed on my mother's banking transaction from 2 days ago. My entire month of rent had just paid for a luxury seafood tower and a live jazz duo so my broke white brother-in-law could play pretend millionaire. I grabbed a bottle of sparkling water and leaned against the brick wall of the house, watching the absolute spectacle. Tyler was holding court by the swimming pool, surrounded by my aunts and uncles. He was gesturing wildly with his expensive beer. "You see," David Tyler said loudly, making sure his voice carried across the yard. "The problem with corporate America is that it completely kills the entrepreneurial spirit. You get these people who just grind away in tiny cubicles. They become so rigid and miserable. Take Maya, for example." Everyone turned to look at me. Tyler flashed a highly patronizing smile. "Maya is great with numbers, but she is stuck in the matrix. She is the classic angry single career woman. No real vision, just endless spreadsheets. That is why Shayla and I are building our own digital empire. We are disrupting the market. We take big risks while people like Maya just blindly pay the bills." My Uncle David nodded thoughtfully, sipping his champagne. "It is impressive, Tyler. How much revenue is your startup generating right now?" Tyler did not even blink. "We are in the pre-seed visionary phase, David. We are focusing entirely on brand awareness and lifestyle integration before we officially monetize. It is all about the daily hustle." I took a slow sip of my water. Pre-seed visionary phase. That was a very creative way to say he had exactly $0 in his bank account and was living off his sister-in-law's rent money. Shayla walked up and wrapped her arm around Tyler's waist, kissing his cheek. "My husband is going to be the next tech billionaire," she announced to the family. "We are manifesting real generational wealth." Generational wealth. The hypocrisy was so thick you could cut it with a carving knife. They were standing in the backyard of a historic house that was exactly 3 weeks away from being seized by the bank because they had actively bled my mother completely dry. They were drinking expensive imported champagne paid for by the very woman they were currently mocking. I did not yell. I did not defend my successful career or point out that my boring spreadsheets were the only thing keeping a physical roof over their ungrateful heads. I just smiled. It was the same cold, calculated smile I had in the basement. "You are absolutely right, Tyler." I called out, my voice ringing clearly over the live jazz music. "I am just a boring corporate accountant. I really admire your unique ability to live so freely without ever worrying about basic things like mortgages or property taxes." Tyler puffed out his chest, completely missing the heavy sarcasm. "Thanks, Maya. It takes a special kind of mindset to operate at this elite level. You will get there someday if you just loosen up a little bit." The morning after Tyler's extravagant backyard birthday bash, the house was an absolute disaster area. Empty bottles littered the sticky patio. Naturally, no one else was awake to clean it up. I was standing in the kitchen brewing a pot of dark roast coffee before logging into my work computer when my mother marched into the room. She wore a silk robe, looking completely exhausted. "Maya, we need to talk about your living arrangements," Brenda announced, leaning heavily against the marble island. I poured my coffee and turned to face her. "The cost of running this household is just getting out of control," she continued, waving her hand dramatically toward the messy backyard. "Inflation is hitting us hard, and the property taxes are going up. Tyler and Shayla cannot contribute right now. So effective immediately, your rent is increasing to $2,500 a month. I stared at her. $2,500, I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. That is a $500 increase with zero notice, Brenda. I am living in a damp, unfinished basement with my clothes in garbage bags. My mother slammed her hand flat against the marble countertop. You are lucky I am not charging you $3,000. I have bills to pay and a lifestyle to maintain. If you want to live under my roof, you are going to help carry the weight. Before I could point out the mathematical impossibility of her logic, heavy footsteps pounded down the stairs. Marcus stomped into the kitchen, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. He was wearing the exact same designer sweatpants from the day he spilled coffee on my suit. "What is the problem now?" Marcus groaned, grabbing a bottle of alkaline water from the stainless steel fridge. "Your mother just informed me my rent is going up to $2,500, I said calmly. Marcus scoffed, taking a long swig of water. "So pay it, Maya. You sit at a desk all day counting other people's money. You can afford it. Mom bends over backward to keep this family together, and all you do is complain. If you do not want to pay the new rate, then pack up your trash bags and get out into the street. We do not need your dead weight around here anyway. I can easily rent that basement out to one of my crypto buddies for $3,000 a month." I looked at my brother, his arrogant face twisted into a smug sneer. He was threatening to throw me out of a house that was legally about to belong to me in a matter of weeks. The irony was so delicious I could practically taste it in my dark roast coffee. I took a slow sip, savoring the moment. "You know what I said," setting my mug down softly. "You are right. Both of you are right. Inflation is terrible, and maintaining a property like this takes serious capital. I will pay the $2,500. My mother blinked, her defensive posture melting into immediate greed. She exchanged a triumphant look with Marcus. "Really?" she asked, trying to hide the eager desperation in her voice. "Just like that," I confirmed. "However, since my corporate housing stipend is only budgeted for $2,000, I will need to classify the extra $500 as a property maintenance contribution for my firm to approve the overage." I reached into my leather work tote sitting on one of the bar stools and pulled out a fresh document I had printed the night before. I slid it across the marble island along with my favorite pen. "This is a legally binding addendum acknowledging that my funds are directly financing the structural upkeep and debt preservation of this specific estate," I explained, tapping the signature line. "It is just more corporate red tape. Sign this and I will write you the check for $2,500 right now." Marcus laughed, shaking his head. "You and your stupid corporate paperwork, Maya. You are such a robot. Just sign it, Mom, and get the check so I can borrow some cash to get my car detailed today." Brenda did not even hesitate. She grabbed the pen and scribbled her name across the bottom of the page without reading a single sentence. She had no idea she just signed a binding legal admission that my money was servicing the debt on the property. I pulled out my checkbook and wrote out the requested amount with a steady hand. I tore the check free and handed it to her, smiling politely. She snatched it away, practically vibrating with excitement. I carefully placed the signed addendum back into my leather tote. The trap was officially set, and they were both completely trapped now. I grabbed my heavy leather briefcase. The morning air felt incredibly sharp and crisp. I drove straight past my accounting firm and headed deep into the financial district of downtown. I parked at a sleek glass building and took the elevator up to the 40th floor. The receptionist offered me sparkling water before guiding me into a massive corner office overlooking the city skyline. Behind a heavy mahogany desk sat Arthur Sterling, a ruthless, high-powered real estate attorney. I did not waste any time with small talk. I opened my briefcase and laid the documents out on his desk. I placed the photograph of the pre-foreclosure notice next to the county property records. Then I placed the signed addendum in the center. He reviewed the paperwork in silence. He adjusted his glasses and looked up at me with a sharp, predatory smile. "Your mother really signed this, admitting that your funds are directly servicing the debt on the property?" he asked, tapping the addendum with his gold pen. She signed it without reading a single word I confirmed. And as you can see from the bank notice, the property is scheduled for public auction in exactly 18 days. My mother has zero capital to cure the default. She thinks she can just ride it out or manipulate the bank. I want to buy the debt. Mr. Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, pressing his fingertips together. It is a highly aggressive move, Maya. The bank wants their money, but they also want to avoid the administrative nightmare of an actual auction. If we approach them with a lump sum cash offer to purchase the distressed note outright, they will likely bite. But you have to understand that buying a non-performing loan on a property this large requires serious liquid capital. You are essentially stepping into the shoes of the bank. I reached into my bag and pulled out my certified financial statements. I have been saving every bonus, every commission, and every spare dollar for the last 10 years to start my own firm. I have $150,000 in liquid cash ready to deploy today. It is my entire life savings. I want to establish a limited liability company immediately. We will call it Sentinel Holdings. Sentinel Holdings will purchase the debt from the bank at a premium discount. Mr. Sterling nodded slowly, clearly impressed by the meticulous preparation. We can expedite the LLC formation by this afternoon, he said, writing down the details on a legal pad. I will contact the loss mitigation department at your mother's bank directly. Since we are offering cash to clear their bad debt ledger before the quarter ends, they will fast-track the assignment of the mortgage. You will assume all rights as the primary creditor. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the paperwork was filed with the state. By the following morning, my life savings were officially wired out of my account. It was terrifying to see my balance drop to near zero, but I knew this was the ultimate investment. For 3 agonizing days, I waited for the bank executives to process the transaction. Finally, on Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed with an incoming email from Mr. Sterling. The subject line simply read, "Transaction complete." Attached was a scanned copy of the recorded assignment of the deed of trust. The bank had accepted my offer. The public auction was officially canceled. The debt was no longer held by a faceless corporation. The debt was now legally owned by Sentinel Holdings, LLC, and I was now the sole managing member of Sentinel Holdings. I sat at my office desk, staring at the digital document until the words blurred. The magnitude of what I had just accomplished washed over me in a wave of pure electric power. My mother, Brenda, thought I was just a naive human ATM living in her damp basement. Marcus thought I was a pathetic loser he could threaten to throw out onto the street. Tyler and Shayla thought I was a boring servant funding their imaginary luxury lifestyle. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet had completely shifted. They no longer owned the historic colonial house with the heated swimming pool and the manicured lawn. They were living in a property heavily mortgaged to me. I was no longer the unwanted daughter begging for basic respect. I was their landlord. I was their primary creditor. I held the absolute legal power to foreclose on them, to evict them, and to strip away the stolen generational wealth they had so carelessly squandered. I locked my computer screen and packed up my briefcase with a profound sense of satisfaction. I was going to let them enjoy their fragile little weekend. Saturday morning arrived with the heavy thud of footsteps echoing above my ceiling. I had spent the entire week quietly enjoying my new status as the secret owner of the property. I walked out of my basement room and headed toward the utility area to wash my work clothes. My mother had clearly decided to punish me for my new rent agreement by piling every single piece of dirty laundry the family owned directly on top of the washing machine. A massive overflowing wicker basket of Tyler's gym clothes and Shayla's designer outfits blocked the lid completely. I sighed and grabbed the handles of the heavy basket to heave it onto the concrete floor. As I tipped it over, a thick stack of opened mail and folded papers tumbled out of Tyler's dirty denim jacket pocket. The papers scattered across the dusty floor. I bent down to scoop them up, intending to throw them in the trash. But the bold eagle logo of the Internal Revenue Service caught my eye. My forensic accountant instincts immediately kicked in. I set my laundry detergent down and picked up the stack of papers. It was a careless, chaotic mess of financial documents that Tyler had apparently been carrying around and forgot about. I smoothed out the top page under the dim basement bulb. It was a copy of his most recent federal tax return. I scanned the lines and my jaw practically hit the floor. Tyler had formally claimed zero income for the entire fiscal year. He had checked the box indicating he was entirely unemployed and suffering from extreme financial hardship. But the very next piece of paper in the pile was a state unemployment benefit statement showing he was actively collecting a massive monthly check from the government. That was fraud, plain and simple, but it was only the beginning. I dug deeper into the pile of crumpled mail. I found 3 different 1099 tax forms from various freelance consulting agencies. Tyler had secretly earned over $60,000 doing remote marketing work. He had hidden every single penny of that income from his tax return. He was collecting unemployment while quietly making a comfortable living. And the most sickening part of all was on the second page of his tax return. Tyler had claimed 2 dependent children to maximize his federal tax credits. He and Shayla did not have any kids. He had literally stolen the social security numbers of Marcus' twin daughters from a previous relationship who lived in another state with their mother. He was exploiting his own nieces to get a larger tax refund while living rent-free in my house. My blood ran cold at the sheer audacity of his crimes. He was lecturing me about the entrepreneurial mindset while committing federal tax evasion and identity theft. I did not say a word. I did not scream up the stairs. I simply gathered every single document and walked back into my basement bedroom. I turned on my laptop and opened my portable scanner. One by one, I meticulously scanned Tyler's fraudulent tax returns, his unemployment statements, and his hidden 1099 forms. I organized the digital files into a perfectly structured folder. At my accounting firm, I regularly worked with federal auditors. I knew exactly what the Internal Revenue Service looked for when building a criminal case. I downloaded the official Form 3949A, which is the information referral document used to report suspected tax fraud. I filled out Tyler's name, his address, and his social security number, which was printed clearly on his tax return. I detailed his hidden income, his fraudulent unemployment claims, and his illegal use of stolen dependents. I attached the scanned evidence, creating an undeniable airtight case against him. When the whistleblower file was complete, I saved it to an encrypted flash drive. Just as I zipped my bag closed, the basement door swung open at the top of the stairs. Tyler marched down the wooden steps wearing his silk pajamas. "Have you seen my denim jacket?" he demanded loudly. "I need it for a lunch meeting with an angel investor." "And hurry up with that laundry, Maya." "I am out of clean socks." I smoothly slid the stack of his mail back into the pocket of his jacket, sitting on top of the laundry basket. I picked up the jacket and casually tossed it to him. He caught it with a scowl. "Do your own laundry, Tyler," I said evenly. "I am only responsible for my own things now." He scoffed and rolled his eyes, turning back up the stairs. "You are so petty, Maya," he muttered. "You will never get ahead in life with that negative attitude." I smiled as he walked away. The satisfaction of holding Tyler's fate in my hands made the damp basement feel like a penthouse suite. I finished loading the washing machine and headed upstairs to pour myself a fresh cup of coffee. Just as I reached the kitchen, the roaring sound of a massive engine rattled the window panes. It was so loud it shook the ceramic plates in the cupboards. I walked over to the front window and pulled back the curtains. Pulling into the driveway was a brand new cherry red sports car. The engine revved aggressively before shutting off. The driver's side door swung open and Marcus stepped out wearing a smug grin and a pair of designer sunglasses. My mother and Shayla were already rushing out the front door, squealing with excitement. I set my coffee mug down and walked out onto the front porch to watch the spectacle. Marcus was leaning against the shiny hood of the car, crossing his arms like he was a celebrity. "Look at this beauty," Marcus bragged, slapping the roof. 2024 model custom leather interior and a supercharged engine. This is what success looks like, ladies. My mother clapped her hands together, walking around the vehicle in pure admiration. Oh, Marcus, it is absolutely gorgeous, she gushed. I always knew your investments would pay off. You deserve this, baby. Shayla was already taking videos for her social media, posing next to the driver's side door. I walked down the porch steps and stood on the driveway. It is a very expensive-looking car, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. How exactly did you manage to secure financing for a luxury lease with no verifiable income and a completely maxed-out credit history? Marcus chuckled, pushing his sunglasses down his nose to look at me. He did not look ashamed. In fact, he looked incredibly proud of himself. Well, I had a little help from my little sister, he said, winking at me. The dealership needed a guarantor with a premium credit score to push the paperwork through. Since we live at the exact same address, and I already know your social security number from that time, Mom made you help me apply for student loans. It was super easy to put you down as the co-signer. My heart slammed against my ribs, but my face remained an unreadable mask. You committed identity theft, I stated plainly. You forged my signature on a binding auto loan. Marcus scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Do not be so dramatic, Maya. It is just a formality to get the keys. I am going to make all the monthly payments with my crypto gains anyway. You will not even notice it is on your credit report. Think of it as an investment in your brother's future. My mother immediately stepped between us, glaring at me. Your brother needed a reliable vehicle for his business meetings, Maya, she snapped. You should be honored that your good credit is finally benefiting this family instead of just sitting there doing nothing. Stop trying to ruin his big moment with your selfish negativity. I looked at the shiny red sports car. I looked at my mother, who was actively defending felony fraud. And I looked at Marcus, who thought he had just pulled off the ultimate scam. The old me would have demanded he take the car back. The new me knew that returning the car would not put him in handcuffs. I nodded slowly. You are right, Marcus, I said softly. It is a beautiful car. Enjoy it. I turned around and walked back inside the house, leaving them to their celebration. I did not go to the basement. I went straight to the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and logged directly into my credit monitoring service. There it was. A brand new hard inquiry from a luxury auto finance group, followed by a massive newly issued auto loan for $85,000 attached directly to my name. I pulled out my phone and dialed the fraud department of my primary credit bureau. I formally reported the fraudulent account and placed a hard freeze on my credit profile. Next, I called the finance department of the exact dealership listed on the inquiry. I calmly explained to the finance manager that a vehicle had just been secured using my stolen identity and forged signatures. I provided my professional credentials and the federal fraud case number I had just generated. The dealership manager sounded absolutely panicked on the phone. I advised him not to alert the buyer just yet. I told him I was compiling a comprehensive police report and that the authorities would be in touch to repossess the vehicle very soon. I ended the call with the dealership manager and closed my laptop. The wheels of justice were already in motion for Marcus and his fraudulent sports car. I walked up the stairs to the kitchen to make my morning coffee. As soon as my foot hit the top step, a heavy plastic laundry basket came flying across the hallway and crashed violently against the wall right next to my head. My mother marched out of the hallway, her face twisted in absolute fury. "What is the meaning of this, Maya?" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the overflowing basket of dirty clothes. "I specifically told you to wash your sister's designer outfits yesterday. You had one simple job to do, and you completely ignored it." I looked down at the basket. Spilling out onto the hardwood floor were Shayla's expensive silk blouses and Tyler's gym clothes smelling of cheap cologne. I stepped over the pile and walked calmly to the coffee maker. "I told you, Brenda. I am a paying tenant, not your maid. I am doing my own laundry from now on." Before my mother could scream again, Shayla stomped into the kitchen, throwing a tantrum. She was wearing a plush pink bathrobe and her face was red with anger. "Are you completely insane, Maya? she shrieked, stomping her foot like a spoiled toddler. I have a massive brand deal photo shoot in 3 hours. I needed that specific white silk outfit washed and pressed. You deliberately ruined my entire content schedule because you are a bitter, jealous loser. You cannot stand seeing me succeed while you sit alone in a dark basement crunching boring numbers. Tyler walked in right behind her, rubbing his eyes and yawning loudly. Seriously, Maya? He groaned, leaning against the doorframe. You are totally messing up our workflow today. We are trying to build a digital empire here, and you cannot even handle basic household logistics. It is just a load of laundry. Stop being so difficult and just do what your mother asks so we can all move forward with our day. My mother crossed her arms and glared at me with pure hatred. You are going to pick up that basket right now, Maya. Brenda ordered, her voice turning dangerously cold. You are going to take it downstairs, wash every single item on the delicate cycle and dry clean your sister's outfit. If her photo shoot is ruined because of your selfish laziness, I will personally add another $500 to your monthly rent. Do you understand me? I poured my dark roast coffee into my travel mug and secured the plastic lid. I took a slow, deep breath. They really believed they held all the absolute power in this dynamic. They really thought they could extort money from me, steal my identity, and treat me like a worthless servant in my own house. I set my coffee mug down on the cool marble island. I did not say a single word. I simply walked over to the hallway and picked up the heavy plastic laundry basket with both hands. My mother smirked, crossing her arms in arrogant triumph. That is exactly what I thought, she muttered condescendingly. Next time, do not make me yell at you to do your basic household chores. Shayla sighed dramatically, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. Make sure you do not use the cheap supermarket detergent on my expensive silk, she snapped loudly. I carried the heavy basket past the kitchen island, but I did not turn toward the basement door. Instead, I walked straight toward the sliding glass doors leading directly to the backyard. I unlocked the metal latch and slid the heavy glass open. A blast of cool morning air swept into the warm kitchen. What are you doing? Tyler asked, his voice laced with sudden confusion. The washing machine is downstairs, Maya. I stepped out onto the concrete patio. It had rained heavily the entire night before, and the freshly dug dirt near the garden beds had turned into a thick pool of dark, sloppy mud. I walked directly over to the massive mud puddle. My mother and sister rushed to the sliding glass door, their eyes widening in sheer horror. Maya, stop, what are you doing? Brenda shrieked frantically. I flipped the heavy plastic basket completely upside down. Tyler's silk pajamas, Shayla's expensive white blouses, and all of their dirty gym clothes tumbled out and landed with a wet slap directly into the deep brown mud. I lifted my foot and stomped the pristine white silk firmly down into the sloppy dirt, ensuring it was completely ruined. I turned around and looked directly at their shocked faces. The maid service has been permanently canceled, I said evenly. Wash your own clothes. Shayla let out an ear-piercing shriek. She dropped to her knees on the edge of the patio. My custom silk is completely ruined, she sobbed hysterically. You are a monster, Maya. Tyler stood frozen in disbelief while my mother grasped the doorframe, looking faint from the sheer audacity of my disobedience. I did not wait for her to regain her voice. I grabbed my travel mug and headed to my car. I was not going to let their tantrums ruin my morning. That evening, the atmosphere in the house was thick with tension. There were two unfamiliar cars parked in the driveway. Aunt Carol and Uncle David, my mother's sister, and brother-in-law had arrived. They were the self-appointed judges of the family, always ready to lecture anyone who stepped out of line. Maya, my mother called out from the formal living room. Her voice was dripping with forced sorrow. Come in here, please. We are having a family meeting. I walked into the living room and surveyed the scene. My mother was sitting on the velvet sofa, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. Shayla was curled up in an armchair, looking deeply traumatized, while Tyler stood behind her with a protective hand on her shoulder, playing the role of the supportive husband. Across from them sat Aunt Carol, wearing her judgmental scowl, and Uncle David, who was already shaking his head at me in disappointment. I remained standing near the entryway. "What is this about?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Aunt Carol cleared her throat loudly, adjusting her pearl necklace. "Sit down, Maya," she instructed, pointing to a wooden chair. "We need to talk about your behavior. Your mother called us in tears today. She told us what you did to your sister and your brother-in-law this morning. Throwing their expensive clothing into the mud is not just petty, it is deeply unhinged. You are tearing this family apart with your jealousy." I slowly walked over to the wooden chair, but I did not sit down. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out my phone, and discreetly tapped the screen. I opened the voice memo app, hit the red record button, and set the phone face down on the glass coffee table right in the center of the room. No one noticed. They were too busy enjoying their own self-righteous anger. Uncle David leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You have always been the black sheep of this family, Maya," he said, his tone heavy with condescension. "You isolate yourself, you obsess over your career, and you refuse to support the people who share your blood. Your mother generously allowed you to move back into this home when you needed a place to stay, and this is how you repay her. By terrorizing her household." Tyler puffed out his chest and pointed a finger at me. "Exactly, David. We are dealing with high-level stress building our startup, and Maya is intentionally sabotaging us. Those clothes cost over $800. Your mother has been far too lenient with you," Aunt Carol interrupted, crossing her arms. "We have decided that you owe Shayla and Tyler a formal apology. Furthermore, you are going to write them a check to replace every single item of clothing you ruined. If you refuse to comply with these basic standards of decency, we will fully support your mother in kicking you out onto the street. You cannot live here and act like a dictator, Maya." My mother sniffled loudly, nodding in agreement. "I just want peace in my home," she whined. "I just want my daughters to get along. Why do you have to be so difficult, Maya? Why can you not just be a team player like Shayla?" I stood there listening to the audio recording, capturing every single threat, every lie, and every extortion attempt. They were openly demanding money from me while sitting in a house that I legally owned. They were threatening to evict the landlord. The sheer comedic value of this intervention was almost too much to handle. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each of them. I let the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment. "You want me to apologize?" I asked softly. "Yes," Shayla snapped, glaring at me. "And I want the money for my clothes by tomorrow morning." I nodded slowly, picking up my phone from the coffee table and slipping it back into my pocket. The recording was saved to my cloud storage. "I understand your demands completely," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "I will take everything you just said into very careful consideration." Without another word, I turned around and walked out of the living room. Without another word, I turned around and walked out of the living room. I walked straight down to my basement bedroom and locked the door behind me. I could hear them upstairs congratulating themselves on putting me in my place. They thought they had won. That recording was the final nail in their collective coffin. The next morning, I took a half-day off from my accounting firm and drove back downtown to the financial district. The receptionist ushered me straight into Arthur Sterling's corner office. He could tell by the look on my face that the timeline had accelerated. I sat down in the leather chair across from his mahogany desk and placed my briefcase on my lap. I pulled out a flash drive and slid it across the polished wood. "What is this?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "That is an audio recording of my mother and my extended family attempting to extort money from me under the threat of eviction from my own property," I explained smoothly. "It also contains evidence of my sister and her husband demanding financial compensation for clothing they claim I ruined. But that is just the appetizer, Mr. Sterling. We are not here to file extortion charges today. We are here to clean house." Sterling leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You are officially the sole owner of the property, Maya. The deed was recorded with the county clerk yesterday morning. Sentinel Holdings LLC holds all rights. What is your next move? I want them gone, I said, my voice cold and unwavering. Every single one of them. I need you to draft formal 30-day eviction notices. I want 4 separate personalized legal notices. One for my mother Brenda, one for my brother Marcus, one for my sister Shayla, and one for her husband Tyler. I want their names printed boldly on the documents. I want the legal grounds for eviction clearly stated. They are unauthorized occupants living in a property owned by my corporation without a valid lease agreement. Sterling picked up his gold pen and began taking notes on his legal pad. Legally, they are considered holdover tenants, he explained. Since there was never a formal lease agreement between them and Sentinel Holdings, we can serve them with an unconditional notice to quit. However, because your mother was the previous owner before the default, we need to make sure the language is airtight. They have 30 days to vacate the premises entirely. If they leave so much as a piece of trash behind, Sentinel Holdings reserves the right to charge them disposal fees. Make sure you include a clause about property damage, I instructed. If they try to punch holes in the drywall or steal the copper piping out of spite, I want it documented that they will face immediate criminal charges for vandalism and destruction of corporate assets. Sterling paused, his pen hovering over the paper. He looked at me with a very serious expression. Maya, I have handled hundreds of real estate disputes and property takeovers. When you evict family members, it never goes smoothly. They will not just pack their bags and leave quietly. They will scream, they will cry, and they will try to use every emotional manipulation tactic in the book to break you down. Your mother will likely try to rally the entire extended family against you. The social and emotional fallout from this is going to be absolutely nuclear. Are you truly prepared to handle that level of hostility? I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the sprawling city skyline. I thought about the $2,000 they extorted from me every month. I thought about Tyler eating my food and calling me lazy. I thought about Marcus stealing my identity to lease a sports car. I thought about my mother threatening to throw me onto the street while using my money to fund their lavish parties. I turned my gaze back to Sterling. My eyes were completely dead of any sympathy. I do not want fallout, Mr. Sterling, I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. I want an explosion. I want them to realize exactly whose money they have been spending and whose house they are standing in. Draft the notices. Use the red legal stamps. Sterling grinned and tapped his pen against the desk. Consider it done, Maya. When do you plan on serving them these documents? I stood right up and grabbed my briefcase. My mother is hosting her famous Sunday family dinner this weekend, I replied. The entire extended family will be there. They are absolutely the most perfect audience. Have the papers delivered to my office by Friday afternoon. I will serve them myself right over the roasted turkey. Sunday morning arrived with a frantic energy. I woke up in my basement feeling refreshed. I walked straight upstairs to the kitchen to find Brenda already barking orders. She wore a floral apron, looking extremely stressed. Marcus was sitting at the kitchen island scrolling through his phone while Tyler and Shayla slept. Maya, my mother snapped the moment I walked into the room. You are late. We have 20 people arriving at 4 o'clock. Go to the premium grocery store immediately. Here is the list. She shoved a long piece of paper into my hand. You are paying for all of this, by the way. Consider it your punishment for ruining your sister's clothes and acting like a spoiled brat all week. And when you get back, you are cooking the entire meal. I am too exhausted to deal with a turkey today. Marcus snickered without looking up from his screen. Make sure you get the good imported cheese this time, Maya. Do not be cheap. I looked at the list. It was extensive and incredibly expensive. My mother was demanding I spend at least $600 on food and then spend 6 hours slaving over a hot stove to feed the very people who were actively trying to destroy my life. I folded the piece of paper and put it in my pocket. You know what, Brenda, I said, keeping my voice perfectly pleasant. You are absolutely right. I have been very difficult lately. I will take care of the entire meal today. You do not have to lift a single finger. Go relax and get ready for your guests. My mother narrowed her eyes, eyeing me suspiciously. She expected a fight. My immediate submission was out of character, but her greed and laziness quickly overpowered her suspicion. Well, she huffed, smoothing her apron. It is about time you stepped up. See that it is done perfectly. Do not embarrass me in front of Aunt Carol and Uncle David again. She marched out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with Marcus. I did not go to the grocery store. I did not preheat the oven or chop a single vegetable. Instead, I simply opened a luxury catering app. If this was going to be their last meal in my house, it was going to be spectacular. I ordered a massive gourmet feast from one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. I selected a perfectly roasted turkey, a massive prime rib carving station truffle mashed potatoes, roasted asparagus, wrapped in prosciutto, and 3 different artisanal desserts. The total came to nearly $1,200. I paid for it using my corporate card. It was a business expense after all. I was celebrating the successful acquisition of a major real estate asset. 2 hours later, a white delivery van pulled into the driveway. Professional caterers carried several heavy insulated boxes into the kitchen. The smell of roasted meats and rich spices instantly filled the entire house. Shayla came running down the stairs, drawn by the incredible aroma. She gasped when she saw the lavish spread being arranged on the marble island. "Oh my gosh," she squealed, pulling out her phone to record a video. "This looks absolutely incredible. Look at this prime rib, you guys." She immediately started taking selfies with the food, making sure to frame the shots so it looked like she was the one hosting this extravagant lifestyle. Tyler walked in behind her, whistling in appreciation. "Wow, Maya," he said, grabbing a piece of prosciutto. "I guess you finally learned how to be a team player. This is exactly the kind of high-level energy we need in this house." I ignored his condescending praise and began setting the dining room table. I pulled out my grandmother's fine china, the heavy crystal water goblets, and the polished silver cutlery. I arranged everything perfectly, ensuring the table looked like a picture from a magazine. I placed the beautifully folded linen napkins at every setting. Then I walked over to my own seat at the far end of the long mahogany table. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. It contained the 4 red stamped eviction notices drafted by Mr. Sterling, the recorded deed of trust proving my ownership of the property, the bank statements showing my mother's financial ruin, the IRS whistleblower confirmation for Tyler, and the active police report for Marcus. The folder was a concentrated bomb of absolute destruction. I placed it squarely on the mahogany wood and gently set my heavy ceramic dinner plate directly on top of it. The plate and the linen table runner hid the folder completely from view. The trap was fully set and armed. Now all I had to do was wait for the guests to arrive. At precisely 4 o'clock, the doorbell began to ring. The extended family poured into the house, filling the hallway with loud greetings and the rustling of heavy winter coats. Aunt Carol and Uncle David were the first to arrive, followed closely by my cousins, their spouses, and a handful of great-aunts who rarely left their homes except for these elaborate monthly dinners. Before anyone even made it to the living room, Marcus was already ushering the men back outside to the concrete driveway. He desperately wanted to show off his brand-new toy. I stood quietly by the kitchen window, watching him lean proudly against the shiny hood of the cherry-red sports car. He was tossing the heavy key fob in the air and bragging loudly about his massive cryptocurrency gains. He told Uncle David that the luxury lease was a small reward to himself for working so incredibly hard all year. He conveniently forgot to mention that my name and my stolen social security number were the only things keeping that vehicle out of police impound. The sheer arrogance of his lies was genuinely astonishing. He was actively soaking up their admiration while actively committing a serious felony against his own sister. Inside the warm house, Tyler was busy playing the role of the wealthy patriarch. He stood confidently by the brick fireplace in the formal living room, holding a heavy crystal glass of my most expensive aged scotch. He had apparently raided my personal liquor cabinet in the basement while I was upstairs setting the dining table. He was completely surrounded by my younger cousins, lecturing them loudly about the absolute necessity of the entrepreneurial mindset. You have to escape the corporate matrix, Tyler proclaimed, taking a pretentious sip of the stolen scotch. You cannot just work a boring 9-to-5 job like Maya and expect to build any real generational wealth. You have to take massive, uncalculated risks. Shayla stood right next to him, nodding vigorously and showing off her expensive designer jewelry. She told everyone in the room about their upcoming brand deals and their highly exclusive angel investor meetings. They were spinning a fragile web of complete fiction, portraying themselves as the ultimate modern power couple, while standing completely broke in a house they were actively destroying. My mother was in her absolute element, soaking up the attention. She floated effortlessly through the dining room, wearing her floral apron over an expensive silk dress, accepting endless compliments on the magnificent spread of food. "Oh, Brenda, you really outdid yourself this time," Aunt Carol gushed, eyeing the massive prime rib carving station, the perfectly roasted turkey, and the truffle mashed potatoes. "It must have taken you all morning to prepare this massive feast." My mother smiled modestly, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. "You know me, Carol," she sighed dramatically, playing the martyr. "I just love taking care of my beautiful family. It is absolutely exhausting, but seeing everyone together like this makes all the hard work completely worth it." She did not correct them. She did not mention that I had purchased every single item on that table with my corporate credit card. She simply absorbed their unwarranted praise like a sponge, taking full credit for my financial contribution while simultaneously treating me like her hired servant. "Maya, bring out the extra ice," my mother snapped, suddenly snapping her fingers directly at my face as I walked past the dining room. "And make sure the water goblets are completely full before everyone sits down." I did not argue or roll my eyes. I walked quietly back to the kitchen, grabbed the heavy silver ice bucket, and began filling the crystal glasses one by one. I moved around the crowded room like a silent ghost, observing the absolute delusion of the people who shared my blood. They were all playing their assigned roles so perfectly: the highly successful son, the visionary son-in-law, the glamorous internet-famous daughter, the endlessly self-sacrificing mother, and me, the bitter, invisible spinster, serving them their cold ice water. I placed the silver tongs down next to the bucket and looked down at my assigned seat at the far end of the long mahogany table. My heavy ceramic dinner plate sat exactly where I had placed it, perfectly concealing the thick manila folder resting underneath. The delicious smell of roasted meat and rich gravy filled the air, and the low hum of family gossip echoed loudly off the walls. I smoothed the front of my dress and took a slow, deep breath while listening to their joyful conversations, echoing everywhere around me without interruption. The guests were finally taking their seats. The perfect moment had finally arrived, and they were all completely unprepared for it. I watched as Uncle David took his place at the head of the table, unfolding his crisp linen napkin with a satisfied sigh. Aunt Carol sat right next to him, eagerly eyeing the massive prime rib. My cousins filed in, filling the remaining chairs and chattering loudly about their upcoming vacations. Marcus sat directly across from me, practically vibrating with smug energy. He kept casually tossing his new car keys onto the mahogany table, making sure the shiny metal logo caught the light from the crystal chandelier. Shayla and Tyler took their seats right next to my mother, acting like royalty, surveying their loyal subjects. My mother stood at the opposite end of the table from me, holding a crystal glass of sparkling cider. She waited until everyone had filled their plates with the expensive catered food I had purchased, before raising her glass high into the air. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" My mother called out, her voice ringing over the noise of clinking silverware. A respectful hush immediately fell over the dining room. Everyone turned to look at Brenda, their faces full of admiration. "I just want to say how incredibly blessed I feel tonight." My mother began pressing her free hand against her chest. "To have my beautiful family gathered in this historic house that my dear mother worked so hard to give us is truly a gift. It warms my heart to see all the success and love in this room. First, I want to raise a glass to my brilliant son, Marcus. We are all so incredibly proud of your recent financial wins and that gorgeous new luxury car sitting in the driveway. It is a true testament to your relentless work ethic and your sharp business mind. Marcus smirked and tipped his water goblet toward her, soaking up the applause from Aunt Carol and my cousins. Next, my mother continued turning her adoring gaze toward Shayla and Tyler. I want to celebrate my youngest daughter and my wonderful son-in-law. Building a startup from the ground up takes so much courage and vision. You two are taking massive risks to secure your future, and you are doing it with such style and grace. You bring so much vibrant energy into this house, and I am so grateful you chose to build your digital empire right here under my roof. Tyler puffed out his chest and wrapped his arm around Shayla's shoulders, pulling her close. We could not do it without your amazing support, Brenda Tyler said smoothly. You have created the perfect incubator for our success. The family murmured in agreement, raising their glasses to the happy couple. I sat completely still at the end of the table, my hands resting quietly in my lap. I knew exactly what was coming next. My mother could never resist an opportunity to elevate her favorite children by publicly tearing me down. Brenda let the applause fade before her smile slowly shifted into a look of deep, patronizing pity. She turned her eyes directly toward me. And finally, she sighed, her voice taking on a heavy, tragic tone. We pray for Maya. We pray that someday she learns the true value of family. We pray she stops being so bitter and stingy with her resources. It breaks my heart to see her isolate herself in her boring corporate job while the rest of us are out here truly living and supporting one another. We can only hope that being surrounded by such positive energy tonight will finally soften her hardened heart. A low rumble of quiet laughter rippled down the table. Uncle David shook his head in disappointment, while Aunt Carol shot me a disapproving glare. Marcus openly snickered, hiding his laugh behind his napkin. Tyler simply smirked, enjoying the public humiliation of the woman whose cereal he ate every morning. They were all laughing at me. They were all sitting at my table, eating my food in my house and laughing at my expense. I did not feel angry. I felt absolute pure electric clarity. The time for hiding in the basement was over. I slowly stood up from my chair. The movement caught my mother's eye, and her condescending smile faltered slightly. I picked up my crystal wine glass with my left hand. I picked up my heavy silver dinner fork with my right hand. I looked directly at my mother, and I tapped the silver metal against the crystal glass 3 times. Ping, ping, ping. The sharp, clear sound cut through the quiet chuckles like a blade. The entire room went completely dead silent. I looked around the room, making eye contact with every single person sitting there. Uncle David put his drink down while Tyler wiped the smirk off his face. I kept my eyes locked on my mother as I reached down and pulled the heavy ceramic dinner plate away. I picked up the thick manila folder and flipped it open. I pulled out a perfectly organized stack of high-quality color copies. I did not raise my voice, but the absolute authority in my tone made it impossible to ignore me. Since we are sharing all the things we are so deeply grateful for tonight, I figured I should go ahead and join the celebration, I said smoothly. I want to celebrate exactly how my hard-earned money is actively funding this beautiful family. I walked over to Uncle David and handed him the first packet of paper. I handed the next packet to Aunt Carol. I walked down the length of the long mahogany table, distributing the copies to my cousins and the great-aunts. Marcus tried to grab a packet out of my hand, but I quickly stepped back and handed it to the cousin sitting next to him instead. What is this nonsense, Maya? My mother demanded, her voice trembling slightly as she watched the relatives put on their reading glasses. These are your official bank statements, Brenda, I announced, projecting my voice so everyone in the dining room could hear every single syllable. Specifically, they are the detailed transaction histories for the past 8 months. You see, when I moved into the damp basement of this historic house, my mother demanded I pay $2,500 a month in rent. She looked me right in the eye and swore the money was desperately needed to pay the property taxes and the basic utility bills. She told everyone in this room that I was a burden and that my rent barely covered my share of the household expenses. Aunt Carol gasped loudly, tracing her finger along a highlighted row of numbers on the first page. I pointed directly at Tyler and Shayla. Look at page 3, I instructed the table. That is the exact transaction history of my rent check clearing Brenda's account. And right beneath it, you will see exactly where my $2,500 went. It did not go to the property taxes. It did not go to the utility bills. It went directly into a joint account used exclusively by Tyler and Shayla. My rent money paid for their luxury vacation to Tulum, Mexico. It paid for their expensive tequila, their beachfront cabana, and their designer dog. They are not building a startup. They are building a massive mountain of debt and using my paycheck to fund their delusions. Tyler jumped up from his chair, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. That is completely confidential financial information, he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. You cannot just steal private documents and show them to people. You are completely insane, Maya. I ignored him entirely and turned my attention to Marcus. Turn to page 5, I told the shocked relatives. Notice the recurring monthly payments made directly to high-interest credit card companies. Those are Marcus credit cards. The cards he maxed out buying designer sweatpants and fake cryptocurrency. Every single time my rent check cleared, my mother immediately transferred exactly half of my money to keep her golden boy from defaulting on his pathetic loans. My corporate salary has been the only thing keeping this entire family from drowning in their own financial incompetence. Uncle David dropped the packet onto his empty dinner plate and stared at my mother in absolute disgust. Brenda, is this true? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. Have you been extorting your own daughter to pay for vacations and credit card bills? My mother gripped the edge of the mahogany table. All the color had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. Her knuckles were stark white, and her chest was heaving with panicked breaths. That is a lie, she screamed, her voice cracking hysterically. Maya is lying. She fabricated these documents because she is a jealous, bitter child. She has always hated her siblings, and now she is trying to turn my own family against me. Do not look at those papers. Hand them back to me right now. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the packet away from Aunt Carol, but her sister simply pulled the papers out of reach and glared at her. The bank logo is right here, Brenda, Aunt Carol snapped coldly. These are official statements. You took her money and you lied to all of us about how hard she was making your life. You sat there playing the victim while actively robbing your own flesh and blood. I stood tall, feeling pure satisfaction, but I was not done. Marcus shoved his chair back so violently it crashed to the hardwood floor. His face was twisted with furious desperation. He charged toward my end of the table, his heavy boots stomping against the floorboards. Give me those papers right now, you crazy witch! He bellowed, reaching out with both hands to grab the manila folder I was holding. He thought he could use his physical size to intimidate me, the exact same way he had always bullied his way through life. I simply took one calm, calculated step to the right, letting his own clumsy momentum carry him forward. He stumbled awkwardly, crashing his hip hard against the sharp edge of the mahogany table. Do not ever try to put your hands on me again, Marcus. I warned, my voice dropping to a dangerously low register. I turned my attention back to the shocked faces of my extended family. Now that we have established exactly how my mother has been funding this beautiful family, I think it is time we talk about my brother and his incredible financial wins. I pointed a finger directly at his chest. Tell them, Marcus. Tell Uncle David and Aunt Carol how you managed to lease an $85,000 luxury sports car with absolutely zero income and a completely ruined credit score. Marcus froze. The aggressive anger drained from his face, replaced instantly by a pale, sickly panic. Shut up, Maya, he stammered, taking a step backward. Keep your mouth shut right now. This is family business. No, I replied sharply. This is federal business. I looked directly at Uncle David, who was still clutching the bank statements. He did not buy that car, David. He stole it. He used our shared residential address and forged my signature to list me as the primary guarantor on the luxury auto loan. He committed felony identity theft against his own sister, just so he could park a shiny red toy in the driveway and play pretend for all of you today. A collective gasp echoed around the dining room. Several of my cousins covered their mouths in sheer shock. Aunt Carol dropped her fork onto her porcelain plate with a loud clatter. Identity theft. Uncle David repeated, his voice thick with deep disbelief. Marcus, is this true? Did you actually steal your sister's identity to buy a car? Marcus looked around the room, his eyes darting frantically, looking for an easy escape route. He looked over at our mother, hoping she would swoop in and save him like she always did. But Brenda was still slumped in her chair, entirely paralyzed by her own public exposure. It is not a big deal, Marcus pleaded, throwing his hands up defensively. It was just a temporary arrangement. I was going to make all the monthly payments with my crypto gains. I swear I was going to pay it all back. She is making it sound way worse than it actually is. I laughed, a cold, humorless sound that echoed off the crystal chandelier. You do not even have crypto gains, Marcus. You have maxed out credit cards that our mother pays with my rent money. And it is a very big deal. In fact, it is such a massive deal that I spent my Friday morning speaking directly with the fraud department at my primary credit bureau. I placed a hard lock on my personal credit profile and generated an official federal fraud case number. Marcus swallowed hard, visibly sweating now. Maya, please, he whispered, his bravado completely shattered. I did not stop. I turned back to the rest of the horrified family. Then I called the finance manager at the luxury dealership. I provided them with the official fraud case number and my professional credentials as a certified forensic accountant. I informed them that the vehicle currently parked in our driveway was secured using stolen information and forged financial documents. They were incredibly grateful for the heads up. You called the dealership? Marcus choked out, his voice cracking. Why would you do that? You are going to ruin my entire life over a stupid car. You ruined your own life the exact moment you forged my signature, I snapped back. Finally, I called the local police department. I filed a comprehensive criminal report for felony identity theft and grand theft auto. The police have the dealership records, the forged loan application, and a copy of my clean credit history. They know exactly where the stolen vehicle is located. Marcus staggered backward, falling heavily into an empty dining chair. He grabbed his head, staring blankly at the mahogany table. He knew his golden boy image was now entirely destroyed. The absolute illusion died tonight. The absolute illusion died tonight. The heavy silence that followed my revelation was suddenly broken by the scrape of a wooden chair. Tyler pushed himself up to his full height, puffing out his chest and glaring down the length of the table at me. He was wearing his expensive linen shirt and his face was flushed with self-righteous anger. He had watched Marcus crumble and my mother freeze, but Tyler truly believed he was untouchable. He relied on an unearned confidence that he had carried his entire life. Listen to me very carefully, Maya, Tyler barked, pointing a long finger directly at my face. You are just a tenant living in the basement. You are invading our privacy and causing severe emotional distress. I am calling the cops right now to have you physically removed from this property for harassment. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it up like a weapon. He expected me to cower. He expected me to beg him not to call the authorities. Instead, I looked right at his red, angry face and I laughed. It was not a quiet chuckle. It was a loud, sharp laugh that echoed off the dining room walls. My laughter completely shattered his authoritative posture. Call them, Tyler, I challenged, spreading my hands wide. Please call the police. In fact, while you have them on the line, you should probably ask them to transfer you directly to the federal authorities. Tyler froze, his thumb hovering over his phone screen. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice losing its confident edge. I reached back into my manila folder. I pulled out a thick stack of papers clipped together with a heavy black binder clip. I tossed the stack down onto the center of the mahogany table. It slid across the polished wood, and stopped right in front of Shayla. "That is an official copy of Form 3949A," I announced, leaning forward. "The Internal Revenue Service Information Referral document. I filled it out last weekend after I found your completely fraudulent tax returns hidden inside your dirty laundry." Shayla let out a small gasp and looked down at the documents. Tyler went completely pale. "You went through my private mail?" Tyler stammered, dropping his phone onto the table. "You left your felony evidence sitting on top of the washing machine in my house, Tyler," I corrected him sharply. I addressed the rest of the shocked family at the table. "Tyler loves to lecture all of us about the entrepreneurial mindset and building a digital empire. But the truth is, he formally claimed zero income on his federal tax return last year. He claimed he was completely unemployed while simultaneously collecting massive state unemployment checks." Uncle David shook his head, rubbing his temples. "That is fraud, Tyler," Uncle David muttered. "Oh, it gets so much worse, Uncle David," I said, maintaining my intense eye contact with Tyler. Attached to that file are 3 different 1099 forms proving Tyler secretly earned over $60,000 doing freelance consulting. He hid every single penny of that income from the federal government, and the grand finale is on page 2 of his return. Tyler fraudulently claimed 2 dependent children to maximize his tax refund. He used the social security numbers of his own nieces. He stole the identities of Marcus' twin daughters to cheat the government while living rent-free off my paycheck. Marcus snapped his head up, staring at Tyler in absolute disbelief. "You used my girls?" Marcus yelled, his voice breaking with fresh anger. Tyler held his hands up, stepping backward away from the table. "It was a mistake," Tyler pleaded, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "It was just a creative accounting error. I was going to fix it." "Creative accounting does not keep you out of federal prison," Tyler, I said coldly. "As a certified public accountant, I legally submitted that entire whistleblower file directly to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. You are currently under an active federal audit, Tyler. They are going to freeze your bank accounts, seize your hidden assets, and prosecute you to the absolute fullest extent of the law. You are looking at serious prison time." A piercing scream suddenly erupted from the side of the table. Shayla grabbed the sides of her head and burst into violent hysterical tears. She began sobbing uncontrollably, her perfect makeup running down her face in dark streaks. She realized in that exact moment that her glamorous internet life was entirely funded by criminal activity and my stolen money. "My husband is going to jail," Shayla wailed, rocking back and forth in her chair. "We are going to lose everything." "You never had anything to begin with," I reminded her. The sound of Shayla sobbing echoed through the dining room, but nobody moved to comfort her. My mother finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. The reality of her entire world collapsing around her broke through her shock and ignited a desperate, furious rage. Brenda slammed both of her hands flat onto the mahogany table and pushed herself up from her chair. She looked around at the disgusted faces of Aunt Carol and Uncle David and realized she had lost all of her social power. She turned her wild eyes toward me. Her face was a mask of pure hatred and victimhood. "Get out of my house!" Brenda screamed, her voice tearing through the air. "You are no longer my daughter. I disown you right here and right now. You are an evil, vindictive monster who wants to destroy her own flesh and blood. Pack up your garbage in the basement and get out of my house right now." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like an unwanted burden. I simply reached back into the manila folder resting on the table. I pulled out one final document. It was printed on heavy legal paper with an official red county stamp on the top right corner. I placed my hand flat on top of the paper and pushed it firmly down the center of the mahogany table. It glided over the polished wood and came to a stop right next to the gravy boat in front of Uncle David. Uncle David looked down at the paper and his eyes widened in absolute shock. "You do not own this house anymore, Brenda," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and steady. My mother froze mid-breath. "What are you talking about?" she hissed, gripping the back of her wooden chair. I pointed at the heavy legal document. "That is a recorded deed of trust," I explained loudly, so the entire table could hear the final truth. "You stopped paying the mortgage on this historic house 8 months ago. You took out a massive home equity line of credit, drained all the money my grandmother worked so hard to build, and then you simply stopped paying the bank." My mother gasped, and her hand flew to her chest. Aunt Carol looked at Brenda with an expression of pure horror. "You lost our mother's house," Aunt Carol whispered, her voice shaking with devastating betrayal. Brenda shook her head wildly side to side. "No," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room. "I was going to pay it. The bank said we had time. They cannot just take it away. They were going to auction it off next week," Brenda, I stated, cutting through her pathetic lies. "You received the final notice of default last month, and you hid it in your designer purse. You let this family eat off expensive china while the bank prepared to throw all of you out onto the street. But the bank is not going to auction it off anymore." Uncle David picked up the deed of trust and read the bold text aloud to the silent room. "The property has been fully transferred and assigned to Sentinel Holdings LLC." Uncle David read, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Who is Sentinel Holdings?" "I am Sentinel Holdings," I answered, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the table. "I took the $150,000 I saved over the last 10 years from my corporate job. The job all of you sat here mocking all night. I hired a high-powered real estate attorney, and my corporation bought your distressed residential debt directly from the bank at a premium discount. I cleared your default and assumed all legal rights as the primary creditor of this estate." The dining room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the crystal water goblets. Tyler stared at me with his mouth open. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. Shayla had even stopped crying and was just staring blindly at the mahogany table. My mother looked at me, as if she had never actually seen me before in her entire life. "You are looking at the sole legal owner of this property," I told my mother, my voice ringing with undeniable absolute authority. "You are not kicking me out into the street, Brenda. You do not get to dictate the terms of my existence anymore. You do not get to use my money to fund your golden children. Every brick of this colonial house, every blade of grass on that manicured lawn, and every piece of wood in this dining room belongs legally to me. You are standing in my house." The absolute silence that followed my declaration lasted only a few seconds before the dining room erupted into chaos. Several cousins started shouting all at once, pointing fingers at Marcus and Tyler. Aunt Carol grabbed her purse and stood up, her face flushed with outrage. Uncle David slammed his fist down onto the mahogany table, making the silverware rattle loudly against the expensive ceramic plates. Brenda let out a choked, gasping sound. Her knees buckled beneath her and she collapsed heavily back into her dining chair. She began hyperventilating, her hands clutching wildly at the collar of her silk dress. She looked completely broken, stripped of every ounce of her manufactured dignity. She tried to form words, but only desperate, panicked wheezes escaped her throat. She looked toward her golden children for help, but they were entirely paralyzed by their own impending ruin. Tyler aggressively paced back and forth near the fireplace, running his hands frantically through his hair, muttering under his breath about calling his lawyers. He had absolutely zero money for a lawyer, and we both knew it. Marcus was still sitting frozen in his chair, staring blankly at the legal deed of trust resting on the table as if the heavy paper had physically struck him. Shayla was hyperventilating right alongside our mother, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the pristine linen tablecloth. "I am leaving," Aunt Carol announced loudly, cutting through the chaotic noise. "I cannot stomach sitting in this room for another second. Brenda, you disgust me. You stole from your own daughter to fund these pathetic parasites. Do not ever call my phone again." Uncle David stood up right beside her, throwing his cloth napkin onto his plate with absolute disgust. "You brought this entirely on yourself, Brenda," Uncle David said, his voice vibrating with deep disappointment. You raised two entitled thieves and married off your youngest to a federal criminal. You should be deeply ashamed of what you have become. The extended family began grabbing their coats from the hallway, rushing to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of my mother's lies. As the front door opened and closed with loud, echoing thuds, I turned my attention back to the four people remaining at the table. They looked like terrified refugees stranded in the wreckage of their own deceit. I reached into the thick manila folder one last time. My hand brushed against the crisp, heavy parchment paper. I slowly pulled out four thick white envelopes. Each envelope had a bright red legal stamp pressed firmly onto the top right corner. I walked around the large mahogany table, stopping directly behind my mother's chair. I dropped the first envelope onto the table right next to her untouched plate of catered food. I moved to Marcus and dropped the second envelope right onto his lap. I walked over to the other side of the table and slid the last two envelopes directly in front of Tyler and Shayla. "What are these?" Shayla whispered, her voice trembling violently as she stared at the red ink. "Those are formal 30-day notices to vacate the premises." I explained, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any sympathy. "They have been officially drafted by my real estate attorney and properly filed with the county housing court. You are all legally classified as holdover tenants occupying corporate property without a valid lease. Your presence here is no longer authorized. You have exactly 1 month to pack up your garbage and get out of my home." Marcus looked up at me, his eyes wide with genuine panic. "Maya, you cannot do this," he begged, his voice cracking. "Where are we supposed to go? I have no money saved. My car is going to be repossessed. Mom does not have any credit left to rent an apartment. We will be completely homeless." "That sounds like a fantastic opportunity for you to practice your entrepreneurial hustle," I replied smoothly, looking directly at Tyler. "Maybe your visionary startup can secure some emergency venture capital. Or maybe you can finally go get a real job." I leaned forward, resting both hands firmly on the polished wood of the table, making sure they heard my next words with absolute clarity. "Listen to me very carefully," I warned, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You have exactly 30 days. If you attempt to damage my property out of spite, you will go to jail. If you punch a hole in the drywall, if you scratch these hardwood floors, or if you take so much as a single light bulb when you leave, I will personally press criminal charges for vandalism and theft of corporate assets. I will have the police escort you off the premises in handcuffs. Now get out of my dining room today." They scrambled out of the dining room like cockroaches fleeing the light. Tyler was the first to retreat, grabbing Shayla by the arm and dragging her upstairs. Marcus followed closely behind, his head hung low in defeat. My mother remained in her chair for a long time, staring at the cold catered food, before finally dragging herself up the stairs to her master bedroom. The house grew incredibly quiet. It was the first time in years that I experienced true silence within those walls. I calmly cleared the mahogany table, washing the fine china, and packing up the leftover prime rib for my lunches. I went down to my basement bedroom and slept more soundly than I had in my entire life. When Monday morning arrived, the power dynamic in the house had completely shifted. The arrogant bullies who had tormented me for months were suddenly reduced to terrified prisoners. I woke up to the sound of soft, pathetic knocking on my basement door. I did not answer. "Maya, please," my mother whimpered through the heavy wood. Her voice was thick with fake tears. "Please open the door, baby. We need to talk about this as a family. I am your mother. I carried you for 9 months. You cannot just throw me out into the cold. I made mistakes, but I only did it because I was overwhelmed." I stood on the other side of the door, adjusting the collar of my tailored work blazer. I did not make a single sound. I let her cry and beg to an empty hallway until she finally gave up and shuffled away. Her tears meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. They were just another manipulation tactic from a woman who had run out of options. I unlocked my door and walked upstairs to the kitchen to pour my morning coffee. Marcus was waiting for me. He looked like he had not slept a single minute. His eyes were bloodshot and he was trembling. "Maya, listen to me," he pleaded, stepping into my path. You have to call the police department and drop those identity theft charges. I called the dealership and they told me the repo men are coming today. I will do anything you want. I will get a job at the warehouse. I will pay you back every single penny. Please do not let them send me to prison. I took a slow sip of my dark roast coffee, looking him up and down. You should have thought about the consequences before you forged my signature, Marcus, I said flatly. The charges remain. I stepped around him and walked out the front door. As I headed to my car, the sounds of a vicious screaming match erupted from an open window on the second floor. Tyler and Shayla were violently tearing each other apart. The pressure of the impending IRS audit and their upcoming homelessness had completely shattered their glamorous facade. You told me you were handling the taxes! Shayla screamed, her voice cracking with hysterical rage. You told me we were building wealth, and now we are getting evicted because you are a fraud. Tyler yelled right back at her, his voice dripping with venom. You spent all the money, Shayla. You bought designer dogs and luxury vacations while I tried to keep us afloat. You are completely useless. Their fake digital empire was crumbling into dust right before my eyes. They had no real skills, no real income, and no more rent money to steal from me. I started my engine and backed out of the driveway. I turned the radio up and hummed along to a cheerful pop song. I drove to my downtown corporate office with a bright, genuine smile on my face. For my entire life, I had let them make me feel small. I had let them convince me that I was just a boring accountant who existed solely to serve their needs. Now I held the deed to the property and the keys to their destruction. I spent the entire week focused on my forensic accounting work, solving complex financial puzzles for my high-paying clients. Every evening, I returned to my house and walked past their terrified faces without saying a single word. I ignored their pleading letters slipped under my door. I ignored my mother's dramatic sobbing in the living room. I ignored the chaos and the panic that consumed them. I was no longer a helpless victim trapped in a toxic family dynamic. I was the landlord now, and the countdown had officially begun. Every passing hour brought them closer to the harsh reality of the outside world. The clock was ticking down to their final moving day, and I enjoyed every single second of their absolute misery. On Thursday morning, the inevitable consequences finally arrived. I was enjoying my coffee and working remotely. Suddenly, the loud, grating sound of a heavy diesel engine backing into the driveway shattered the quiet morning. I looked out the front window and smiled. A massive industrial tow truck was slowly reversing toward Marcus and his shiny red sports car. The driver hopped out wearing a high-visibility vest and carrying a heavy metal hook. He walked to the back of the car and began attaching the towing cables directly to the rear axle. Marcus came sprinting down the wooden stairs wearing only his boxer shorts. He threw the front door open and ran barefoot onto the cold concrete, waving his arms frantically. "Hey, stop! What are you doing?" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with pure panic. "You cannot take that car, I have the keys right here." He grabbed the tow truck driver by the shoulder, but the burly man shoved him away. The driver pulled a clipboard from his belt. "I have a federal fraud recovery order for this vehicle," the driver stated flatly. The financing was secured using stolen identity documents. The local police department and the dealership authorized an immediate repossession. Step away from the vehicle, sir, or I will have you arrested for interfering with a legal recovery. Marcus dropped to his knees right there on the damp grass. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed uncontrollably as the tow truck hydraulic lift hoisted his fake status symbol into the air. My mother watched the entire pathetic scene from the living room window, her face pressed against the glass. She could not save him. Her golden boy was ruined. As the tow truck pulled away, Tyler marched out of his bedroom fully dressed and holding his phone. He looked at Marcus crying on the lawn and then glared directly at me. He thought he could outmaneuver a forensic accountant. Tyler spoke loudly into his phone, ensuring I could hear every single word. "Yes, operator. I need police officers dispatched to my residence immediately," Tyler said, his voice dripping with fake distress. We have a hostile tenant living in our basement who is actively terrorizing my family. She is stealing our property, committing financial crimes, and threatening us with violence. Please send someone right away." He hung up the phone and crossed his arms, flashing me a triumphant smirk. "You pushed too far," Maya Tyler sneered. "You think you hold all the cards just because you bought some debt. You are a tenant harassing your landlords. You are going to leave this house today in the back of a squad car." I slowly closed my laptop and walked down to my basement bedroom. I opened my safe and retrieved my heavy manila folder. I walked back upstairs and waited patiently by the front door. 10 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up with their lights flashing. 2 uniformed officers walked slowly up the driveway. Tyler threw the front door open and rushed out to meet them, pointing an accusing finger directly at me. "Officers, thank God you are here," Tyler shouted, playing the desperate victim. "That woman is a basement tenant who is trying to extort us and steal our house. Arrest her right now for criminal trespassing." The officers turned toward me. "Ma'am, step outside, please," the taller officer commanded. I stepped onto the porch and handed the officer my open folder. "I am not a tenant," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "I am the sole legal owner of this property. That document is the recorded deed of trust proving my corporate ownership. Behind it you will find 4 legal eviction notices that were served to these unauthorized occupants on Sunday. They are angry because they have exactly 3 weeks left to vacate my premises." The officer reviewed the deed, verifying the county stamps and the signatures. He looked at the eviction notices and then slowly turned his gaze back to Tyler. Tyler's triumphant smirk completely vanished. The officer stepped toward him, his expression hardening into pure authority. "Sir, you called emergency services to report a hostile intruder," the officer said sharply. "This woman is the legal homeowner. You are actively facing eviction. If you ever call emergency dispatch again to file a false police report over a civil housing dispute, I will personally place you in handcuffs. I will book you for wasting police resources. Do I make myself absolutely clear?" Tyler stumbled backward, his face turning a sickly shade of white. "Yes, sir," Tyler whispered, looking down at his shoes. The officers handed my folder back to me, tipped their hats respectfully, and walked back to their cruisers. Tyler turned around and walked silently back into the house, utterly humiliated and defeated. Tyler turned around and walked silently back into the house, utterly humiliated and defeated. The remaining days of my 30-day eviction notice passed in a blur of frantic packing and bitter, suffocating silence. They knew there was no way out. There were no more manipulative tears that could save them, and no more wealthy relatives willing to lend them money. Aunt Carol and Uncle David completely cut ties, ignoring my mother's desperate phone calls. The house felt like a ticking time bomb, and I was the only person holding the detonator. On the morning of the 30th day, the weather was cold and overcast, perfectly matching the bleak reality of their final hours. At exactly 8 o'clock, a marked county sheriff cruiser pulled into my driveway. A tall, broad-shouldered deputy stepped out, resting his hand casually on his duty belt. I requested a civil standby to ensure they vacated without destroying my property. I walked out onto the front porch holding a steaming mug of dark roast coffee and greeted the deputy with a polite nod. He stood by the front door, watching with an eagle eye as the ultimate purge finally began. The front door swung open and Shayla emerged first. The glamorous internet sensation who had constantly mocked my basement bedroom was now dragging 2 heavy black plastic garbage bags across the concrete porch. They could not afford proper moving boxes. The thin plastic snagged on the sharp edge of the doorframe, tearing open and spilling several of her expensive designer silk blouses onto the cold, dirty ground. She dropped to her knees, scrambling to shove the ruined clothes back into the trash bag while sobbing loudly. Her perfect makeup was smeared, and her hair was a messy tangle. There were no cameras filming her now. There was no digital empire being built. There was just a broke girl stuffing her entire identity into a garbage bag under the watchful eye of law enforcement. Tyler followed closely behind her, carrying a cheap plastic laundry basket filled with his remaining shoes and bathroom supplies. His shoulders were completely slumped, and he kept his eyes glued to the pavement. He did not puff out his chest or attempt to use his privilege to command the space. The impending federal tax audit had completely broken his spirit. He loaded the laundry basket into the back of the rusted 20-year-old sedan they had been forced to borrow from a mutual friend. He looked utterly defeated, stripped of the fake entrepreneurial confidence he had used to terrorize me for months. Marcus came out next, carrying a single green duffel bag containing his designer sweatpants and whatever dignity he had left. Since his luxury sports car had been repossessed by the dealership, he had absolutely no way to transport his things. He tossed his bag into the back seat of Tyler's borrowed sedan, without making eye contact with anyone. The Golden Boy was now officially homeless, unemployed, and facing a massive felony fraud case that would likely end with a prison sentence. Finally, my mother walked out of the house. Brenda moved slowly, as if the heavy weight of her own consequences had aged her 10 full years in a single month. She carried a small cardboard box containing her personal files and a few framed family photographs. She walked down the porch steps and stopped in the middle of the empty driveway. She turned around to look at the massive, historic colonial house. The house her mother had worked tirelessly to pay off completely. The house she had secretly remortgaged to fund her favorite children's delusions of grandeur. She looked at the beautifully manicured lawn and the wide brick chimney, and then she looked up at me, standing confidently on the porch. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the warm liquid soothe my throat. I did not smile, but I did not offer any sympathy either. Brenda stood there in the cold morning air and began to cry. It was not her usual fake manipulative crying used to get her way. It was a deep, gut-wrenching sob of pure, agonizing regret. She realized in that exact moment that she had lost absolutely everything she valued. She had lost her pristine reputation in our community. She had lost the unwavering support of her extended family. She had lost her precious golden children who were now too busy fighting each other to comfort her. And most importantly, she had permanently lost her mother's house. The deputy checked his watch and loudly cleared his throat, signaling that their legal time was officially up. My mother wiped her face with a trembling hand and climbed into the sedan. I watched them slowly drive away. The house was finally mine again. The house was finally mine again. 6 months passed since that cold, overcast morning when my toxic family drove away from my property. During those 6 months, the heavy, crushing wheels of justice and karma moved with absolute precision. I did not have to lift another finger to ruin their lives. They had already done all the heavy lifting themselves. The federal government does not forgive, and it certainly does not forget. Tyler learned that lesson the hard way. The Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division tore through his finances like a hurricane. They audited 5 years of his back taxes, uncovering every single hidden gig economy payment and every fraudulent dependent claim. Because he had brazenly stolen the Social Security numbers of his own nieces, the federal prosecutors showed him absolutely zero mercy. His bank accounts were completely frozen and permanently seized. He was slapped with hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution penalties and criminal fines. To avoid serving a lengthy federal prison sentence, he was forced to take a plea deal that required him to work 3 grueling minimum wage jobs just to garnish his wages for the government. The moment the federal agents showed up to freeze their joint checking account, Shayla realized her glamorous digital empire was officially dead. She did not stand by her visionary husband. She immediately filed for a messy, highly publicized divorce. She tried to rebrand herself online as a tragic victim of a financial scammer, but her followers quickly realized she was completely broke and living in a tiny space. Her brand deals completely dried up overnight. With no education, no actual work experience, and no husband to steal for her, Shayla was forced to move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the worst side of town. She did not move into that tiny apartment alone. My mother Brenda was forced to sign the lease. Since my mother had actively destroyed her own credit by defaulting on my grandmother's historic house, she had to pay a massive security deposit just to secure a roof over her head. She was now surviving entirely on a fixed Social Security income and bagging groceries part-time at a discount supermarket to pay for electricity. The woman who once hosted lavish catered backyard barbecues and bragged to Aunt Carol about her pristine colonial home was now sharing a tiny linoleum bathroom with her endlessly complaining daughter. They spent their days trapped in that small apartment, bitterly screaming at each other and blaming everyone else for their miserable existence. Brenda had permanently lost her golden children, her prestigious community reputation, and the massive generational wealth her own mother had spent a lifetime building. And then there was Marcus. The identity theft charges I filed against him remained firmly on his permanent criminal record. He managed to avoid jail time by pleading guilty to a lesser misdemeanor charge, but the damage was irreversible. His credit score was completely obliterated. He could not secure a loan to buy a bicycle, let alone a luxury sports car. Without my mother to coddle him and pay his credit card bills, Marcus was violently thrust into the harsh reality of adulthood. The self-proclaimed cryptocurrency genius was now working the overnight shift at a massive industrial shipping warehouse. The man who once intentionally spilled scalding coffee on my professional work clothes was now wearing a stained yellow safety vest and steel-toed boots. He spent 10 hours a night lifting heavy cardboard boxes and loading freight trucks for minimum wage. His supervisor was a strict, demanding woman who did not care about his excuses or his fake entrepreneurial hustle. Every time he tried to take an unauthorized break or complain about his sore back, he was immediately written up. He was exhausted, broke, and utterly miserable. They had all tried to build their lives by standing on my neck. They thought they could extract my hard-earned money forever while treating me like dirt. But the moment I removed my financial support, their entire world collapsed instantly. They were now completely cut off from the generational wealth they had so greedily tried to steal. They had no access to the historic family home, the heated swimming pool, or the manicured lawn. They had no access to my bank accounts. They were entirely isolated, paying the severe ultimate price for their own profound arrogance and unforgivable cruelty. The universe had delivered their karma perfectly wrapped in the exact legal consequences they had arrogantly assumed they could escape. They wanted to ruin me, but they ended up completely destroying themselves instead. They traded a beautiful, secure family legacy for cheap thrills and fake online validation. Now they have absolutely nothing left to show for their incredibly selfish and utterly foolish choices. With the house finally completely empty, I started the long process of erasing every single trace of their toxic presence from the property. I did not just clean the rooms, I completely transformed them. I hired professional contractors to rip out the cheap faux marble desk Shayla had installed and replaced it with beautiful custom-built mahogany bookshelves. I threw away the tacky ring lights and the stained carpets. I restored the original hardwood floors, bringing back the warm, natural shine my grandmother had always loved so much. I repainted the walls in bright, welcoming colors that completely banished the heavy, oppressive energy that used to choke this house. The kitchen where my mother used to bark orders at me was remodeled with sleek modern appliances and a massive quartz island where I now cook peaceful meals just for myself. I brought the historic colonial house back to life, honoring the true legacy my grandmother had intended. I spent weekends planting new flowers in the garden where my sister once ruined her designer clothes in the mud. The physical labor of restoring the property became a deeply therapeutic exercise for me. I was washing away years of emotional abuse with every fresh coat of paint. But the most satisfying transformation of all happened down in the basement. The dark, damp space where my family had banished me with my clothes in garbage bags was completely unrecognizable. I invested a portion of my first quarter business profits to finish the entire lower level. I installed heated flooring, recessed lighting, and floor-to-ceiling glass partitions. It is no longer a depressing storage cellar. It is the official luxury headquarters of my independent forensic accounting firm. I sit down there every morning at a massive solid oak executive desk surrounded by dual monitors and high-end leather furniture. I run my own highly successful business from the exact same space where they told me I was nothing but a boring number cruncher. My client roster is completely full, and my revenue has tripled since I stopped allowing human parasites to drain my energy and my bank accounts. Every time I walk down those wooden stairs now, I am reminded of the immense power of resilience. As I sit here today looking out the window at the beautifully manicured lawn, I feel a profound sense of absolute peace. I want to take a moment to speak directly to anyone watching this who might be trapped in a similar nightmare. Generational wealth is not just about passing down houses or stock portfolios. True generational wealth is passing down the knowledge of your own inherent value. It is the absolute refusal to be treated like a disposable resource by the people who share your blood. Toxic family members will always try to use the word love as a weapon. They will call you selfish when you stop giving them your money. They will call you bitter when you start demanding basic respect. They will use guilt and obligation to build their own comfortable lives directly on top of your broken spine. Do not let them do it. You are not a human automated teller machine, and you do not owe anyone a free ride simply because you share the same last name. Setting brutal boundaries is the most radical act of self-love you can ever practice. Sometimes you have to be the villain in their delusional story, so you can finally be the hero in your own actual life. Walking away from my mother and my siblings was the hardest thing I ever had to do, but it was also the single best investment I have ever made. I bought back my sanity, my peace, and my future. I created a sanctuary where only truth and respect are allowed to enter. The journey was undeniably brutal, but it was absolutely necessary for my ultimate survival. I learned that letting go of toxic ties creates the vital space needed for true abundance to enter your life. Every single tear shed in that basement eventually watered the seeds of my own unbreakable independence. Do not ever be afraid to stand alone. The view from the top of your own personal mountain is truly breathtaking. If you are currently sitting in a damp basement while someone else lives comfortably off your hard work, I truly want you to start planning your exit strategy today. Gather your documents, save your money in silence, and prepare for the day you finally turn the tables. You deserve to live in a house where you are respected. You deserve to build an empire that belongs entirely to you. If you've ever had to sever ties to save yourself, tell me your story below. Stay strong and never finance your own disrespect. The story of Maya serves as a powerful eye-opening reminder that sharing DNA does not guarantee love, respect, or loyalty. The most profound lesson embedded in this narrative is the absolute necessity of setting uncompromising boundaries, especially when dealing with toxic family members. For too long, society has peddled the romanticized narrative that family is everything, often using this very sentiment as a weapon to trap individuals in vicious cycles of financial and emotional abuse. Maya's journey brilliantly dismantles this harmful misconception. When we examine Maya's harrowing ordeal, we see a woman whose diligence and financial stability were treated as public resources by her mother and siblings. They brazenly masked their exploitation and entitlement under the guise of familial duty. The critical takeaway here is that you cannot buy genuine affection or respect by financing someone else's delusion. Realizing this allows you to step out of the victim role and into a position of strategic empowerment. Maya didn't just complain about her circumstances, she silently and meticulously took back her power by utilizing her financial literacy, patience, and legal rights. Her story teaches us that true generational wealth isn't just about accumulating money, it is about cultivating profound self-worth and refusing to tolerate disrespect, regardless of who is dishing it out. It takes immense courage to walk away from the people who raised you, but sometimes severing those toxic ties is the only way to save yourself. You possess the absolute right to protect your peace, your hard-earned assets, and your future from anyone who seeks to maliciously drain them. Protecting your well-being must always remain your ultimate priority, even if it means rewriting the rules of engagement with your own relatives. Take a hard look at the relationships in your life today, and do not hesitate to cut the financial and emotional cords if they are pulling you under.